Hey, this is Lorre Wilson with eXp Realty. I have Maggie and Shelley on with me today, and we are talking about, they're both eXp agents as well up in the Morgantown area. Shelley is also licensed in Pennsylvania. And we're talking about listing properties, okay, and how it all works. Because if you haven't heard, there was a huge lawsuit and there is a verdict now. There were some unhappy sellers out in the Midwest. They filed lawsuits against certain brokerages and our National Association of Realtors. And honestly, as soon as that verdict came out, that same attorney filed within 30 minutes again against other brokerages. So this will be interesting to watch. We just felt like it would be good to have a discussion about how it works when we list property. Okay. So one of the first things that we do is, Shelley, what do you do when someone calls you to list their property?
Well, I get an appointment with them just to go visually check out the house and then discuss what they've done to the property since their ownership. And I also ask them if they were to stay there, what they would do to the property, because that usually entails what should be done before they list it. But then I discuss, I get to take a preliminary market analysis. And then I say, I'm going to break this down even more, pinpoint a price that we should list. And then I go over actually closing costs with them and discuss the commission and how that works and where it goes, and just discuss all my marketing and how much marketing I'll do for them, and pictures and out-of-pocket costs that we incur by real estate agents without even selling the property.
Right.
So.
It's interesting that you say you do a market analysis. So I think a lot of people don't understand that when they go under contract, unless someone's paying cash, but they can get an appraisal just as easily as somebody who is getting a loan. But the lender is going to send an appraiser, right, to make sure the value and condition matches their loan type. And then their loan type, has its own set of criteria, and any lender can stack on top of that criteria whatever they want. So, the point that you made about a market analysis coincides, I guess, goes hand in hand with what an appraiser does, right? Once it's under contract. So we suggest a listing price based on the last 6 months of comparables. So when you do comparables, what do you include?
I include just, usually I can look at the house online if it was listed before and get an idea of what it looks like just by past pictures. But I just explain to them this is just a rough estimate of what has sold in the area that's similar, square footage, bedrooms, bathrooms, and land. And then it all depends on the condition of the house and the finishes, and then also the roof, furnace, and if those are up to date.
Maggie, so there's different about you. Sorry.
Well, also, no, that's fine. Also, when I'm doing comparables, I'm making sure that I'm not comparing a ranch to a 2-story contemporary. And I think that's where a lot of the general public gets lost. They're like, well, my neighbor's house, or Uncle Joe's house,
right,
or something like that, and they're not even similar houses. Sure, they may have 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, but they're a different style. They may be in a totally different area. Also, if it has like a garage with it, and if it's like 1 stall, 2 stall, those kind of things. But I also, when I take that market analysis, I am explaining all of that to the seller, so they fully understand where these numbers are coming from.
Sure. I like that. Yeah. And it's just I do the same thing. I do the same thing. I go and I log into the multiple listing service. I go back 6 months. I use square footage, number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms. And like you said, same style of a house, like a log home is not going to be comparable to a 3-bedroom ranch that's brick. I mean, they're just not the same. And an appraiser is not going to use that as a comp either. I think something else that's interesting about appraisals is that they are also realtors. So, they have to follow the same code of ethics that we do. I have a problem with them also selling real estate. I'm like, pick one, pick one.
Yes.
But, there are not that many appraisers in the appraising business at all. I know in our area, there aren't. What is it like in Morgantown?
There's not too many.
So
yeah, I found Morgantown has more. I'm doing sales all over the state, so it kind of is area dependent. I've been in some of the more remote areas. It's a little bit difficult to get an appraiser.
I agree with you. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that there are some listings that I've taken and they're remote and the appraisers somebody won't even pick it up. I mean, it's because it's such a, but they like having that small little group. It's hard to become an appraiser. You have to have like 600 hours under an appraiser or something. It's crazy. It's crazy. So after your listing appointment, besides that, let's say you get the listing, you and the sellers have discussed everything. Everything's been transparent, right? Everything's been discussed and you come to an agreement. What is your typical next step? What do you do for your sellers when you list property?
You mean besides take pictures and all that?
Yeah. I mean, like I have a list, for every listing. It's like a checklist, right? I have a listing checklist. I have an under contract checklist. I have a, pre-closing, post-closing checklist. I mean, do you have something like that you use?
Yeah, for whenever it's under contract, I do, but I just basically do the same thing for each seller. After I take pictures, we list the property and then we make sure, we can have options just to show property to pre-approved buyers, or they can show to anybody. But for if we present any offers, we make sure everybody is pre-approved or proof of funds are in hand before we present anything.
Sure. Maggie, what would you say about representation? What would you say about representing a seller? Why you? Why not someone else? Because, because my cousin over here has been licensed for 50 years and they said,
Right. So I've actually been in like competition with other agents to get listings. And I've actually done fairly well with that. But at the end of the day, it's your knowledge base and what you're bringing to the table for them. I mean, I explain literally everything, every step of the way. Before they ever sign the listing agreement, I'm also explaining the listing agreement to them. There are negotiations to that and you go through that, but you prove your value. But then once you get the listing, back it up with everything you said. If I'm listing outside of, kind of my general MLS area, then I'm going not only to, because EXP is vast, I can obviously market within EXP, but I'm also aware of other agencies and I'm giving them a shout, and saying, hey, this isn't in your MLS, but this is for sale. I'm literally, pounding the pavement to get buyers in there.
Sure.
For them.
Sure. Well, that's the whole goal, right? And at the end of the day, everyone has the same goal. The seller wants to sell, the buyer wants to buy, And when they choose representation, how much better does that transaction go? Have you ever represented a seller and not a buyer, or a buyer not be represented?
Yes.
Yeah. Because in West Virginia, the law does not require a buyer or seller to have representation, right?
And
it's hard. Well,
it is harder, but it seems like you're doing so much more work.
Sure you are. Sure.
Because
you have to guide them also.
Right.
Yes.
And
that's the portion. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, that's, when a buyer or a seller does not have representation and an agent is representing one or the other, it does make the process more difficult, simply because your fiduciary duty is to your client, right?
Exactly.
So how much information can you disclose? Well, you can't. You're protecting your client. You're holding things close to your chest in your client's best interest, right? And whereas when buyers and sellers go completely unrepresented in a transaction, they're saying things to each other that they can use against each other to one up each other. And it's actually very damaging to the transaction. If you ask any lender, they're going to say they want sellers and buyers to have representation because they can't help. They're not licensed. They're not a party to the contract. They can't answer questions. I had a closing a few months ago. Lender, we were at the closing with the lender. The buyer was there. And so we were talking about representation and buyers and sellers. And this lender had a transaction where no one was represented. And the seller decided that what to sell for. Okay. Of course, didn't know what the market was like. And I'm just going to say, well, he said the purchase price was like $75,000. Appraiser went out. It appraised for 126. So, boy, seller, you saved all kinds of money, didn't you? You saved all kinds of money because they didn't want to have representation. Representation is just not about paying compensation, right? Everybody gets paid for their job. So if you want to cut corners on things, why in the world would you cut corners on one of the biggest financial decisions you ever make in your life? Why would you do that? Why would you do that? Think about the money those sellers left on the table. So if it appraised for 125 or 126, it probably could have been listed for much higher, and they would have at least sold it for 125 or 126. They left all kinds of money on the table. And I don't know, I just feel like it's a really good, discussion point on representation. And, I mean, I just listed a property in Ohio, and it's not cheap. It's a very high end price point. And the seller said, man, that's a lot of money out of my pocket. And I said, yeah, you're right. It is. It's a lot of money out of your pocket. And we discussed it, and we discussed what we both, between the seller and I, we discussed what we both thought was fair. And then the seller said, well, what about a buyer's brokerage? And I said, well, this is for our area. This is typically what happens, but we can offer them whatever you want. You want to offer $1? Offer them $1. But you know what happens? The problem is that unfortunately, when a buyer's brokerage or a buyer's agent sees that $1, they're going to come back and they're going to ask us for more, because they're bringing the buyer to the table, and this is what they do for a living. And now you don't have to, but Shelley made a great point when we were talking before. In our area, what's the average median income and where you guys are in Morgantown?
I'm not sure, but in Fayette County, where I sell a lot of houses also, it's very low income.
Mm-hmm.
So buyers don't have, well, they ask for seller assistance with closing costs most
Sure.
of the time. Yeah.
Sure.
So they can afford another cost on top of that.
Right. Because not all loan types allow buyers to compensate someone for representation. Right. So I know VA loans don't.
Yeah, no, they don't.
You know, and I just Googled it in Cabell County, which is where I live. The median household income between 2017 2021 was $43,779. $43,779. Per capita income in the past 12 months between 2017 2021, it was 27,985. So here's the thing. When we list property, the seller, there are fees for the seller, right? There are fees for the buyer. And I want to tell you that if for any reason buyers are going to have to start compensating representation in our area, you know what's going to happen? They're going to go straight to the listing agent.
Mm-hmm.
And
how does that affect representation?
Well, the listing agent has a fiduciary duty to the seller.
Always. Even
yes.
if they're in dual agency.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
What
you're not going to get good negotiation by a long shot.
It's hard. Have you ever been in dual agency, either one of you?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
I just closed on one. As a matter of fact, the buyers interviewed me and asked me a lot of questions before. Yeah, and I loved that because they were educated about the process.
Mm-hmm.
But they literally took me through a string of questions, and at the end of the day, they said, yes, we want you to be our realtor in a dual agency. But you know, they knew there were things I could not discuss. I could not disclose any of that, but they were, at the end of the day, they were okay with that.
Don't you think that there is a level of responsibility on the buyer and the seller to also, I mean, it's, you can Google anything, right? It's not like anything's a secret anymore. So do you feel like there's a level of responsibility on the buyer or the seller's part to make sure that the decision they're making in representation benefits them?
Yes,
absolutely.
I mean, before I was having some work done at the house, and before I hired anyone, don't you think I researched? I got more than one quote, and I researched. They should be interviewing agents. Absolutely, they should be.
Absolutely.
Whether it's for buyer representation or seller representation. And sometimes hiring an agent because maybe their compensation is not as much as another. Just always remember too, sometimes you get what you pay for. So, where do you want to cut your corners? Right? Do you want to just because, that brokerage their compensation may not be as much. I mean, what are you getting for it? Have that there are flat rate brokerages, discount brokerages out there. I get in the multiple listing service. It doesn't happen very much here. I'm not sure about where you guys are, but there aren't that many here. But I see in the multiple listing service where the listing agent literally says, contact the owner to show.
Yes.
Where's that?
We have a couple of those.
To get
contact they literally have a phone number. You call the phone number that then connects you straight to the owner.
Crazy.
And you can,
I mean, we were just talking about fiduciary duty. Where is that fiduciary duty?
There isn't any.
There isn't any. I mean, do you think that seller's going to accidentally say something that they shouldn't? Probably.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Probably.
But I think we should talk about why buyers should hire an agent, because a lot of my buyers don't know what they can negotiate and when, and what may
Right.
occur during
Yeah.
appraisal and their appraisal conditions and all that. So
yeah, I mean, what do you think if buyers and sellers are unrepresented, what do you think they're going to do when the appraisal comes back and the value is not there?
or a ton of repairs need done.
Yeah.
So we don't know whose responsibility it is to do those, and how to negotiate that. So that's where
yeah, I mean, some of the crazy, if you can, what's one of the craziest things that's happened in a real estate transaction that you were involved because of you, this transaction went to the closing table and it was done? Can you think of anything off the top of your head?
Yeah, I just had one. I represented buyers that they had in Morgantown, properties are just crazy, and he wanted a specific area, and he had just a budget to stay under. And basically in that budget, you're looking at fixer-uppers, but it was an FHA loan. So we made an offer on this, but before we made an offer, I said, well, this and this and this is probably going to come up on the appraisal to need repaired. And I made sure that the seller knew that, because he couldn't afford to do the repairs himself. And to make sure that she was willing to do that before we even went to sign a contract. So we did that. And then also when the appraisal came back, it was 15 items needed repaired.
Ooh. Yeah,
we had to kind of negotiate that, and the buyers did end up doing some work on it themselves, just like painting and stuff like that. But the buyers don't know what they can and can't do, so that's why they have guidance like us to.
Well, again, if they don't have representation, the lender can't talk to the seller and say they've got to give it to the buyer. Then the buyer has to go to the seller. And then they ask questions and the buyer's like, I don't know. And then they have to go back. I mean, that's a perfect example. I had a listing, it was last year sometime. And it had actually two. So one of them was, there was an old single wide trailer on the property, and it was literally embedded into the ground. Like it wasn't on a permanent foundation, but the skirt around it through the years had just, buried in, had to go. It had to go. And that is a lending requirement. That's not an agent requirement, right? Seller had to pay to have it torn down and burned, because it was just so, like, if they tried to pull it out, it would just fall apart. So they just burned. And then the other thing was, I had one in Kentucky that the appraiser, when they took pictures and turned the appraisal in, there were railroad tracks in the picture. And the lender said, we have a problem. Like, what? There's railroad tracks nearby. Yeah. Well, we need to know if that devalues the home. I said, why would it do that? There are more than 100 homes all the way down the road that are right there next to the railroad tracks as well. We went round and round and round and round. Who would have thought that was a first for me? Railroad tracks, conventional loan too, by the way.
Oh, wow.
Yep. So I had to go through and find listings that were in that neighborhood, like within so many blocks of the railroad tracks, and show the value and how it had not been decreased. Crazy. So, it's things like that, that's what people are paying for, right? They're paying for, that's representation. We manage that.
Knowledge and experience just to get to the closing table.
And how many things happen behind the scenes that you just take care of and your clients don't even know it happened?
Yeah.
Every day, every single day. And maybe that's our fault. Maybe we should be more transparent. Maybe we should say, this happened. I already took care of it for you. Don't worry about it. But you need to know I did this. I'm not used to doing this.
Yeah.
I'm not used to doing that. But that's part of showing our value. Don't you agree? Not just when not just when you're interviewed, Maggie, like when you were talking to those buyers.
Well,
because there are always things that come up through a transaction that you don't have a crystal ball. You don't know what's going to come up.
Well, I mean, I had an appraisal. I was the listing agent. The appraisal came through and the appraiser never gave value to the detached garage, which was in really good shape. Had a brand new roof, things like that on. And I'm just like, wait a minute. So I'm already calling and getting that ball rolling for that.
Sure.
And then I'm having the conversation with my clients and saying, okay, the appraisal came back. It's a little low. However, this is what I've done. I've got the ball rolling.
Yep.
And that was actually fixed and remedied. And, we all went to closing. But if they would have gotten that, they don't even know the first thing to do. Like, who do you call first?
Right.
What do you say?
Right. Yeah. Well, and some appraisers pick up. So if anybody doesn't know this, once the buyer's loan goes to the lender, there's a portal for the lenders to request the appraisers. Now, appraisers and lenders are not allowed to talk to each other. The appraiser does get a copy of the purchase agreement, but they're not allowed to talk to each other. So it's kind of like a lottery. Like they have, each lender has a list of appraisers, and they put this request through like a portal, and then whoever picks it up, whichever appraiser picks it up gets it. Right. So, again, gosh, there's just so much to talk about. Using a local lender makes a big difference in that as well. Right.
Yes.
So I had an Ohio listing a few years ago, and the buyer used a lender from 3 hours away. They didn't that appraiser came from 2.5 hours away, did not know our market at all, didn't have access to the multiple listing service. So it caused an issue. And, just going back to this lawsuit, I just think it's so unfair for these attorneys and these sellers to just, try to drill that it's the real estate agent that's at fault for all of this. And, there's more than one person involved in these transactions. Right.
Yes.
And they really are kind of like checks and balances for each other.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you think about it, you've got a listing agent, a buyer's agent, you have a home inspector, you have an appraiser, you have a lender, you have an underwriter, you have an insurance person, you have a pest, usually like a pest, inspection. So like, depending on where you are, there could be pest, mold, radon, those people that have their fees too. And then of course the attorney. And so all of that keeps a good checks and balances throughout a real estate transaction. So gosh, it's just killing me to think that
And
they
the
can
seller
pick
hired
one part out of all of that, one part of it.
And the seller hired that particular agent. There's a real estate agent around every corner. So they could have hired somebody else to explain things better or negotiate their commission or whatever.
Sure. Yeah. Gosh, we could talk all day about this stuff.
Yeah.
It's the lesson learned here is that being transparent and educating the public. That's all we can do. That's all we can do. And there will always be people that you don't want to work with and that don't want to work with you. Right.
Mm-hmm.
There are always, like I've had, gone to listing appointments where they've interviewed other agents and, I didn't always get the listing. That's okay. That's all right.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's nice being the second or third real estate agent.
Yeah.
Because those agents have probably told the sellers what they want to hear rather than this is the way it really is. So anything you want to add before we step away?
I don't think so.
I was going to say, I think sometimes you know, when you're the second or third real estate agent and they've gone to the person who has told them what they want to hear, and
Mhm.
then the house doesn't sell,
Mhm.
you're getting that phone call
Yeah.
because you were upfront with them,
True.
honest about things.
Mhm.
Yes.
Right. Transparency and honesty is always the best. I don't sugarcoat things when I talk to my clients. It doesn't do them any good, doesn't do me any good. And,
Mhm.
you know, and if that's, I mean, I've gone to show listings that the list price, the buyers have looked at me and said, oh my gosh, this is way overpriced. I agree with you. They wouldn't have let me list it because I would have, I would have told them the truth, obviously, you know? So,
Mhm.
well,
Yep.
thank you guys so much for being here, and I look forward to more discussions. Like I said, I could talk to you all day long. It would be, it's it's nice to hash things out and share.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.